The music hadn't even started, and yet all eyes were already drawn to them. Kenny Rossi stood tall, composed, his frame calm but certain. Beside him, Arlene Sullivan floated like she was made of melody. They weren't the loudest dancers, nor the most daring. But when they stepped onto the floor of American Bandstand, something in the room shifted. It always did. On screens across America, the magic came through in black and white. Kenny's steady lead, Arlene's quiet glow, the rhythm that seemed to pass between them like a secret. A simple turn felt like trust. A glance became a question, and a perfectly timed spin made the country pause, just long enough to wonder, what are we really seeing here? They never spoke into the camera. They didn't need to. Every Friday afternoon, for a few fleeting minutes, they told a silent story. One of comfort, of connection, of two young hearts moving as one. And as the music faded, a question grew louder in living rooms from Philadelphia to Fresno. Were they more than just partners on the dance floor? Was this joy, this grace, this rhythm, love? Did Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan ever marry? It wasn't just a dance anymore. It was a story America wanted to believe in. The floor at American Bandstand was marked by more than tape and timing. It was marked by presence. And no two dancers had a presence quite like Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan. Week after week, they took their place without fanfare. There were no grand entrances, no dramatic flourishes, just a boy and a girl standing close, waiting for the beat to drop. But when it did, something quietly electric unfolded. Their movements weren't exaggerated. They were precise, elegant, almost restrained. Kenny never pulled. He guided. Arlene didn't perform for the camera. She danced with the music, and always with him. It was a kind of intimacy born not from romance, but from practice, rhythm, and deep mutual trust. And yet, to millions watching at home, it looked like love in motion. Television, especially in the 1950s, had a way of turning moments into mythology. With only a few channels, millions tuned in at the same time. They saw the same smiles, the same glances, the same easy timing. The camera zoomed in just long enough to catch the way her hand settled into his, or the way their eyes met mid-spin. And without realizing it, the nation began to write a story, one that neither Kenny nor Arlene ever claimed, but also never denied. It helped that they looked the part. Kenny was clean-cut and composed with a quiet confidence. Arlene was all grace and elegance with a style far beyond her years. Together, they embodied a certain post-war American ideal, wholesome, respectful, picture-perfect. If you were a teenager, you wanted what they seemed to have. If you were older, they reminded you of what it once felt like to be young and full of possibility. Behind the scenes, their connection came from hours of repetition, not whispered secrets. They practiced counts, balance, spacing. They learned to anticipate each other's weight shifts, to trust that a hand would be there when it needed to be. There was no scripted chemistry, no planned expressions, just two dancers who understood each other's rhythm better than most couples understood conversation. Still, the audience believed. And that belief turned Kenny and Arlene into something larger than themselves. Teen magazines began to feature them more frequently. Photo captions played coy. Just partners? Or something more? Radio shows mentioned their names together. Girls wrote in, some with admiration, others with curiosity, all hoping to know the truth. But no answer ever came. At least, not the one they wanted. And so, with each perfect spin and gentle dip, the question deepened. They danced like lovers, so surely they must be. Long before social media, before hashtags could turn two names into a trend, the nation had already chosen its favorite couple. They weren't from a movie or a pop song. They came from an afternoon dance show beamed out of Philadelphia into every corner of post-war America. Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan didn't need to announce anything. They didn't even need to speak. All it took was a glance, a turn, a shared rhythm, and the audience did the rest. Fan mail started slowly. A handful of letters after each episode, mostly from local kids asking for autographs. But as their popularity grew, the numbers ballooned. By 1958, the show was receiving hundreds of letters a week, many addressed specifically to Kenny and Arlene. Most carried a simple, aching question. Are you two really going steady? Teen magazines fed the fire. Covers featured grainy stills of the two mid-dance, frozen in perfect balance. Inside, editors speculated gently. just enough to keep the mystery alive. "They move like they've been dancing forever," one article read. "And maybe, just maybe, they'll never stop." The line between admiration and invention blurred. Even the most skeptical readers found themselves hoping. Scrapbooks were filled, fan clubs organized, girls signed Mrs. Kenny Rossi in their notebooks, while boys admired Kenny's quiet cool and wished they had someone who smiled at them like Arlene did. Photos were cut out, clipped, and saved in dresser drawers. These weren't just dance clips anymore. They were moments, emotionally underlined by the viewers themselves. There was something about their image that made it easy to believe. Arlene's polished appearance, always composed, always elegant, gave her a kind of timeless appeal. Kenny, with his calm demeanor and strong frame, seemed protective without being possessive. Together, they looked like the kind of couple parents wanted their kids to be, and teenagers wanted to become. In some ways, it didn't matter what the truth was. The version the public believed had taken on a life of its own. Week after week, America returned to the screen, not just for music and movement, but for the hope that maybe, just maybe, the silent story they were watching would someday end with a wedding. That wedding never came, but the fantasy lived on. Because when something feels true, when it taps into a collective longing, it doesn't need confirmation. It just needs repetition and a little space to grow in the hearts of those watching. And so, with each spin and step, America wrote its own love story. One without dialogue, one without ending, one where Kenny and Arlene would always dance together. For all the questions, for all the wishing and wondering, the truth was quieter than anyone expected. Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan were never a couple. Not in the way the public dreamed, not in the way magazines hinted, not in the way thousands of letters had so hopefully asked. They were partners, remarkably good ones. They shared an understanding built not on romance but on rhythm, a trust forged in the strict timing of live television, not candlelit conversations. Still, to watch them dance was to believe in something soft and hopeful. Even Arlene herself has acknowledged it years later with a knowing smile. People saw something in us that we didn't even see at the time. In interviews, Arlene has spoken about their bond, how they practiced together, learned each other's cues, balanced each other out. She's laughed gently at the rumors, never mocking them, only marveling at how deeply the audience cared. There may have been a flicker of innocent affection, a little puppy love, as she once described it, but it was fleeting, sweet perhaps, but never serious. Kenny never publicly pushed back against the image either. He remained respectful, quiet, dignified. He knew what he and Arlene had shared, something rare, something elegant. Not love in the romantic sense, but something just as rare. Mutual respect, trust, and timing, so precise, it fooled even the loneliest hearts watching from afar. What made it harder to accept for fans was how convincing it all felt. Because it wasn't an act. Kenny and Arlene weren't pretending, they really were in sync. They really did laugh at the same moment, tilt toward each other during a break, find the same beat without speaking. But for them, it was always within the boundaries of the dance. The camera had magnified it. The audience had expanded it, and time had turned it into legend. But behind the legend were just two teenagers showing up after school, doing their best to look graceful under pressure, learning where to place a hand, how to finish a spin, how to trust someone enough not to step on their toes. They never kissed behind the scenes, they never dated, and they never married. And yet, the story never lost its glow. Because sometimes, two people come together for a brief moment, move beautifully in the same direction, and leave behind something unforgettable, even if life takes them elsewhere. Kenny and Arlene weren't in love, but they were part of one of the most beloved love stories American television ever told. The music eventually faded. The lights dimmed. The faces on American Bandstand changed, as all things do with time. For Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan, the end of the spotlight wasn't a scandal, a fall from grace, or a heartbreak. It was simply life moving on. Kenny, always a quiet presence even at the height of his fame, didn't chase the next stage or camera. Instead, he stepped into the world with the same steadiness that made him such a reliable dance partner. In the years after Bandstand, he turned toward something completely different: business. Specifically, he became the head of a respected construction and restoration company in the Philadelphia area. His firm, U.S. Pro Coatings and Building Restoration, Inc., and specialized in waterproofing and repairing buildings, an unglamorous job by television standards, but one that required precision, timing, and trust. Funny how some rhythms stay with you. There are few public records of Kenny seeking attention. He lived modestly, worked hard, and built a reputation based on integrity, not fame. He married, raised a family, and remained in Pennsylvania. When he passed away in March 2024 at the age of 80, tributes from those who knew him spoke less about television and more about his character, his decency, his work ethic, his loyalty. Arlene's path was different. While she stepped away from performing, she never left the world of bandstand behind. Over the decades, she became one of its most visible ambassadors. She attended reunions, spoke at events, and, perhaps most importantly, helped write the book that preserved its history, Bandstand Diaries. She remembered not only the music and the steps, but the people, the awkward moments, the heartbreaks and laughter that viewers never saw. She carried the torch for a generation's memory, not as a celebrity, but as a witness. Unlike Kenny, Arlene's personal life did occasionally reach the public eye. She was briefly married and in later years openly shared her life with a longtime female partner, something that, in the conservative 1950s, would have been impossible to express. Her honesty later in life only deepened the respect people felt for her. She remained poised, gracious, and remarkably grounded. Though they never married each other, Kenny and Arlene never spoke ill of one another. They appeared together in interviews decades later, smiling at the memory of who they'd once been. Time had softened the edges, but the rhythm between them still flickered when they spoke. Less a romantic spark, more like an old song you both still know by heart. Their lives moved in different directions, but neither forgot the magic they had shared, not because it was love, but because it was real. And real things, even brief ones, tend to stay. They didn't get married, they didn't fall in love, and yet somehow they remain one of the most remembered couples in American pop culture history. Decades later, people still speak of Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan in the same breath, as if the bond forged through dance had never truly been broken. Why? Because sometimes what we remember has little to do with facts, and everything to do with how we felt. In the late 1950s, American Bandstand wasn't just a television show. It was a national mirror, reflecting back an idealized version of youth. It was clean-cut, well-dressed, orderly. And Kenny and Arlene fit that image perfectly. But they also did something more. They made it feel human. Their dances didn't scream romance, but they whispered something close, something just believable enough to hold on to. And when you're young, or remembering being young, that's often more powerful than the truth. Television had its own way of telling love stories back then. No kissing, no declarations, just a well-timed smile, a respectful hand on the back, a quiet moment before a spin. The audience filled in the rest, and in the case of Kenny and Arlene, they filled it in completely. Even now, fans from that era can describe specific moves. They remember how Arlene tilted her head slightly just before a turn, how Kenny's shoulders stayed firm no matter the tempo. They remember the feeling, not just of watching two people dance, but of witnessing something rare. Connection, grace, and a kind of emotional safety. It looked like love because it felt like something you'd want love to be. And because their story was never finalized, never confirmed or denied with absolute clarity, it stayed open. Open to longing, open to hope, open to projection. That ambiguity, so frustrating in news headlines, is exactly what makes a memory endure in the heart. Kenny and Arlene never broke up because they were never officially together, so their story never ended. It just lingered. There's also a comfort in the kind of love that can't be proven. It asks nothing. It demands no defense. It simply exists as a shared nostalgia. A dream danced across black and white screens, passed down like a song you hum without knowing all the lyrics. In that way, Kenny and Arlene became more than people. They became symbols of youth, of possibility, of a time when the world seemed a little slower and a little softer. And long after the music faded, that image, two teenagers spinning in time, eyes locked just long enough to make you believe, remained. Not all love stories are lived. Some are only imagined. But that doesn't make them any less real to those who remember. So no, Kenny Rossi and Arlene Sullivan never married. They weren't high school sweethearts. They didn't fall in love behind the scenes or exchange whispered promises after the cameras stopped. What they gave us wasn't a romance. It was something else. It was grace, timing, trust, a quiet connection that never needed labels to be meaningful. And though their steps were choreographed, the feeling they left behind wasn't. That was real. That's what people held on to. Decades have passed and still their names are said together, Kenny and Arlene, as if separation never happened. Maybe because what they represented was bigger than a wedding ring. They captured a moment in time when two people could dance in sync and, for a few beautiful minutes, make the world believe in something softer. And perhaps that's the answer to the question we've been asking all along. They didn't marry. But in the hearts of millions, they were already something more, a memory that moved in perfect time.